the Ambassador of Spain, His Excellency Juan Antonio Mar Pujol, for a session on war effect, divided diplomacy, in conversation with Senior Executive Editor, Input Times Now, Madhav Das Gopalakrishnan. In just a few moments from now, he's going to be joining us for another very interesting conversation.
Absolutely. You know, that will shift the focus from what we just discussed, which is domestic politics, to global politics. And like we said, the global equations are changing. More and more countries are demanding multilateralism. That's the way forward. That's a view that the Prime Minister also spoke about in the SCO summit. The entire global order is changing. And at a time like this, this conversation is going to be crucial.
Absolutely. And since the focus is going to be the impact of war that's being felt by countries across the world, the conversation is going to be important from that particular aspect, because many are saying after what has happened in the Gulf, specifically Swati, it's not going to be same again after the war is over.
Absolutely. Please welcome on stage Ambassador of Spain, His Excellency Juan Antonio Mar Pujol, with a session with Madhav Das Gopalakrishnan, Senior Executive Editor, Input.
Over to you, ma'am.
I request you to pick up the mic, and I'd like to thank you so much, Ambassador Juan Antonio Mar Pujol, for joining us. As the Ambassador of Spain, I think I have to begin by asking you about the one topic that is on everybody's minds at this point of time. We're in an era of war. There's a war currently taking place. Spain has taken a very, very different and a very clear position as compared to other countries. Would you like to articulate what is Spain's position, and how do you see this war easing off? And do you see it easing off soon?
Well, I would say that our position starts with the idea that to build things is very difficult, to destroy things is very easy. So, to put an example with very physical terms, to build a great city, maybe it takes 300, 400 years. To destroy a city, if there is an earthquake, it takes only 30 seconds. So the other way around, it does not work. You cannot build a city in 30 seconds and need 200 years to destroy the city. So we have to be very clear on how difficult it is to build the things. So in our idea is that we have to preserve at the maximum the United Nations. For us, this is the key thing. Let's say humanity is here for 200,000 years. Really, it's in the last 8,000 years that humanity has been taking off towards an era of intelligence. But it's only in the last 100 years that we have managed to create global organizations to deal with the peace. The first one was the League of Nations. It lasted only 18 years, but it was the first essay in the human history. The second one, the United Nations, happened because the catastrophe of the Second World War had been much larger than the catastrophe of the First World War. There were 45 million people dead. Because of the degree of destruction, we managed to create an organization that has been preserved for 80 years. Now there is a kind of fatigue. People say, well, this organization does not manage to resolve this conflict or the other. But we have to understand that if we don't put the maximum power to the United Nations, we will have no framework, global framework of the humanity to challenge the conflicts and the disputes. So we say that no intervention in the world can be outside the legitimacy of the United Nations. The United Nations has the mechanism to confront certain challenges. So we have this Security Council, it's true, with 5 permanent members, but then we have another 14 members that represent the rest of the world. So our position is, it's very important that confronting any situation of war in the planet, United Nations has to be the leader in confronting the problem.
But that's a very, very important point you're making, but there are some criticisms of this. Of course, the United States, and we've seen what President Trump has had to say about the role of the UN, but how effective it has been is a question that you have addressed. There are many other concerns about how structurally the UN has also failed. For instance, India, where you're an ambassador currently, has 1.4 billion people who have no representation in the, as a permanent member in the Security Council. So how fair is the UN structure? Is it high time that UN is perhaps restructured to reflect the modern realities of today, which have changed drastically since the Second World War?
Well, we have always been in favor of the entry of India into the Security Council, no doubt. Although I would say you something that is very personal. I would be very happy if India joined the Security Council in a different way as the other 5 countries are. The 5 countries are, to a certain extent, a little bit very connected with the national interest. I think India should enter the Security Council as the nation of inclusivity in the world, as the nation with the flag of harmony and peace. That would be very important. And I think that the history of India is very relevant for that. People, they think, not here in India, but outside, that in 1947 there was India and Pakistan. But in reality, it was not all India. There were states that they had armies, they had political powers, and in a period of 7-8 years, you built the whole Republic of India, and with no internal armies inside. There is only police. So it has been a great experience of integrating the people in a very large civil space. People can work in Calcutta and move to Kerala. People can take money in any part of the country. So it's a big space. So if you have been able to build a space for 1.5 billion people having only police inside, no armies, it's a great example for the future of the world. So as Mr. Jai Shankar was saying, how are we better with the United Nations or without the United Nations? I think we are much better with the United Nations than without. But at the same time, it's an alive body, and as an alive body, it has to evolve. So obviously, the Security Council has to be reformed, the way of working, but it's very important to preserve it as the maximum body on legitimacy for peace in the world.
Right, and interesting that you mentioned India, and its role in peace, because that's what India's demand has been so far, that it's time to end the war. But India is also a country that is uniquely positioned. It has good diplomatic ties with US, Israel, as well as Iran. So do you see India, the Finland Prime Minister, for instance, has come out and said that he would like to see India playing a mediatory role. Do you envisage that as well?
Well, it's not me the one to judge the Indian foreign policy. What I say is that obviously this crisis is a crisis important for India because it is affecting also the countries in the Gulf. Countries in the Gulf, they have a lot of Indian population living there. So it has an impact on the life of these people, also on the job of these people, on the remittances. So it's a very serious crisis. And I think India is trying to be in the group of people who work in favor of an appeasement.
Right. Now, coming back to the war, President Trump has used some very strong adjectives for Spain. I'm just going to quote him in one particular conversation. He says Spain is a loser. And he also talks about UK, should support US in its invasion. What would you say about the reactions coming in from the US to what the position that has been taken by Spain?
Well, we are a country that has always been connected to the world, It's not a small nation in Europe close to the borders. We are extremely high connected to all Latin America. Spanish is one of the official languages of the United Nations. We are now a global player in the world. And what is interesting for us is how the world sees us, not only how the United States. And I think that the position of President Sanchez has been a position that has got every day more supporters in the world. I see that in Europe, where everybody is saying to him, maybe the way you saw the things at the very beginning were the right way of seeing the things. And I see from all parts of the world, from Latin America, from Asia, from Central Europe, from Africa, people saying this idea of Spain of reinforcing United Nations and trying to create the key player in the multilateral system is the right way to go for the future.
Right. Now, US and Israel have 2 or 3 premises and reasons for this war, which have been stated publicly. One is, of course, regime change. The other is to end the nuclear program of Iran, which they said is a threat to the entire world. But the other aspect on which they have articulated is the people's protest, particularly on women's rights and, against the oppression of women in Iran. Somewhere do you feel that that is an issue where, they have a point in terms of the role in which we've seen protests actually taking place on the streets of Iran? Does that justify this kind of action in your view?
Well, we're a country who has evolved a lot in democracy. We came from dictatorship that ended in 1974. Since we built democracy, is a country who has multiplied by 7 the GNP. It has created a very harmonious system in the country. So we see the benefits of democracy, and we are very in favor of a very positive evolution of Iran internally. But we don't think that the way of changing a regime is by an external action. That is very clear.
Right. But European countries have not been able to change Trump's mind. Why do you think that is the case? Because EU countries, while the position articulated by Spain is there, why do you think they've not been able to press upon Trump, at least as far as this point that you're raising, as far as the war itself is concerned, to at least ease off as far as the attacks are concerned?
Well, I think that in our case, it was a question of the rapidity of reflex of the president. It's linked to a demand to use the American bases in Spain, and these bases can be used in a case of need of protecting, of defense, but not in a case of attacking, and not out of the NATO objectives. So when the president was asked to use the bases, the answer was that it was not in the different requisites that are needed to be used these bases. So he was very fast. Maybe the others were not so fast. Right. But little by little, the response has been the same. The same response was coming from Italy, and the same response was coming from other countries in Europe. The difference was the speed he reacted.
Right. One of the big concerns here in India is that India has close to 1 crore Indians who are actually living and working in the entire Middle East. Now, some amount of them may have come back over the last few weeks, but the larger concern is also about the kind of attacks that have happened from Iran's side to the other GCC countries. And in fact, in Abu Dhabi, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday an Indian person has lost his life. The question that I would then ask you is just in the same vein as in which you're criticizing US and Israel's strike on Iran, would you also criticize Iran's actions on neighboring countries who are not directly involved in this conflict?
Well, we have to understand that a kind of very serious action against Iran started. The way this country is going to react, it's very different to foreseen from outside. The best thing would have been not to activate this kind of dynamic, And the best thing is how we stop this kind of dynamic and we regain peace in the region, That is the key thing.
Right. I'm going to come back to India and Spain ties now. How do you see it evolving, particularly after the EU agreement, the FTA agreement? What are the particular areas? There's aircraft manufacture. There's a lot on the table. How do you see the ties evolving in coming years?
Well, I think that one of the great advantages of Europe is that it is very predictable. Sometimes people say, yes, Europe is a great gathering of nations, but it's lacking leadership. Okay, I think we have to be very careful with the idea of leadership. Because leadership, when you have a very good leader, you go very fast maybe. But when you have a bad leader, you go immediately to the disaster, immediately. And we have to remember the case of Germany, Germany was the most sophisticated society in Europe in terms of musicians, philosophers, writers in 1930. Then suddenly a terrible leader arrived, Hitler, in 1933. And in only 6 years of time, it took Germany to the total disaster. So when people think about, for example, Switzerland, nobody remembers normally a president of Switzerland, not in the last 20 years, in the last 200 years. You say, tell me the name of a president of Switzerland. Nobody remembers. But if you see which is the country with the highest per capita income in Europe, there are two, Norway and Switzerland. And the only one that has not gone to any war, who has not suffered any destruction, has been Switzerland. So the lack of leadership sometimes is not so bad if you had a good political architecture. So I would say that Europe maybe lacks this kind of visual leader, but on the other hand, we have created the system to have very solid laws. And when you sign something with Europe, it's something that you can count that is going to be respected. So after 22 years that we have been negotiating a free trade agreement, finally it was agreed on the 27th of January this year. And this is going to open a great space for the trade and investment of all India with these 27 nations of Europe. It's a big market, you know, it's the double than the United States. The double than the United States is the largest space for trade in the world. So I think that is a very positive movement. In the case of Spain, you know, by different circumstances in history, there had been no visit of any Prime Minister of Spain or President of the Spanish government for 18 years. Then finally, we managed to have President Sanchez coming here on the 27th and 28th of October 2024 to Vadodara with Prime Minister Modi, and then it was agreed to create 2026 as the dual year of Spain and India for culture, tourism, and artificial intelligence. And we have already put very important initiatives in motion as having the largest gathering of universities of Spain with the top universities of India. Last 19th and 20th February, the vice chancellors of 45 universities of Spain, we have in total 93, so half of the total universities of Spain came to India to meet the 120 top universities. And we are going to create a great common space in the universities for the mobility of teachers, students, and at the same time, research. We think that the connection of the researchers in medicine, in engineering, in architecture, in economy between India and Spain maybe is going to be the real driving force to connect our societies.
Right. There are over 200 companies of Spain working currently in India, but one project that has a lot of interest is the C-295 aircraft project. How is that coming along?
Well, this is going quite well. It's the idea of making in India, you know, of having this connection of technology and production made in India, but, you know, something can be also done with the trains, something can be done with the energy. We share one thing, India and Spain, is that we are not big powers in gas and oil. So Spain has had to develop a big development in solar and wind. And we are number one in Europe in renewable energies. Number one by large. That is why Spain is the less affected economy in Europe by the energy crisis. Because nearly now 48% of our total energy comes from the renewables. And India is taking off very fast in that. So it's a great scope for connection of India and Spain in all the big area of renewables and also all connected with the sea. We are number one also in Europe for desalination plants, for managing the harbors, and every time there is more interest of India to take advantage of this very big position connecting with the seas.
Right. You also mentioned, before we came in, about the opportunity, because India is a country of 140 crore people, 1.4 billion people, and you have a country where about half a population is still in the rural areas. When this urbanization rapidly happens, over the next few decades, we expect to see a huge movement of people coming in from the villages to the cities. What is Spain's experience in that, and how do you think the two countries can work in that aspect?
Well, I think that this is in my view, after being here 2 years, for me, this is the key thing, but very few people are speaking about that thing, you know? I understand because it's not very much rooted in the DNA of Indians. I think Indians, you like to have a kind of very vital and vibrant way of living with no too much order from outside. The order is created maybe by the interaction of the day. But when you are such a big country in terms of population, I think that you have to think more in terms of urbanism. You know, you have now maybe 200 million people arriving to India in the next 20 years. 200 extra million people is like adding half of nearly Europe. It's adding Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Belgium at the same time in 20 years, you know? It's a huge amount of people. But at the same time, you have 48% of the people in the agriculture, 48. In Europe, for example, our percentage is about 2.5, 3%. So it's very clear that in the next 20 years, you will move from 48% to maybe only 20% in the agriculture. So 48% of the population of India is nearly 700 million. So if half of them move out of agriculture, it means that you have 350 million people who will go to the cities. So if you add 200 plus 350, you will have 550, nearly the double of the United States, moving to the cities. How are you planning to settle all these people? So this could be possible. I think, frankly, this could be possible. But what I see is that nobody is thinking on that. There are people, important people in the government that are thinking about smart cities as a kind of spots of cities that are going to be very well designed. But maybe are smart cities for 2 million people, 3 million people. We're thinking of 550 million people. So in our case, we had really a great experience, and the experience is called Barcelona. Why? Because in 1850, when there were no cars at all, and nobody could think that the car could even exist, there was a major that said, I think that industry is going to develop. We have to think about the future. And we had a very small city with very small streets with a wall surrounding the city, connected the harbor, the inside of the city, and the wall. And the rest was agriculture fields. And then a major thought, we have to think the future, and developed on a paper, developed 25 streets from left to right and 20 from north to south. And all this was a separation of what today are 6 lanes for cars, very big. So everybody protested, saying, you know, why this man is taking so much piece of land? Because all the land was private. But they designed that, and in a period of 70 years, every people has been obliged to build inside these different quadriculars with certain norms. You could have different facades, but the size of the buildings could be the same, etc. So this explains why today Barcelona, that is not the capital of any state, but it's between the 20 cities in the world that people want to visit. And all this is connected with urbanization. And we have been very strong on that in our, let's say, common history in Latin America. The development of Quito, the development of Lima, the development of Antigua, Guatemala, all these cities were very well planned. And I think that this is an area where India and Spain can collaborate a lot. Obviously, it will be with Indian way of thinking and Indian characteristics, but something very serious has to be done in the developing of urbanism in India. The second thing, if I can say, but I don't want to be too visionary, but I think that the key thing for the future of India will be aerial mobility. You know, the nature has already shown that aerial mobility is the safest way of mobility. When you have 5 million starlings flying and nearly blocking the sun the light of the sun, there is not a single accident. In my life, I have never seen two birds crashing in the air. They are persecuting, they are trying to play, but I have never seen a crash of birds. And you have 5 billion flying together. If you put 100 horses and you block the horses and you open the gates, there are accidents. They slide, one go over the other. So nature has already shown to you that aerial mobility is the key. So for India, I think is the key thing. If you want to develop the terrestrial mobility with highways, with fast speed train, the amount is enormous and the cost is enormous. And this was done with the possibility of aerial mobility did not exist. But nowadays, when you will have takeoff in vertical and landing in vertical, obviously it has to be very different of what people are thinking now. You know, these small planes for individual use that are being developed in Dubai, in other countries, in Singapore, is like the mobile telephones in 1992. Has nothing to do a mobile telephone in 1992 with an iPhone of 2005. But I think this country, if they developed a great industry for the individual aerial mobility, it could take a leadership role in the world.
Interesting perspectives for the future. But you've also recently written a book and you've also spoken extensively about AI. Take us through how you look at AI and how it's going to drastically change lives in coming decades.
Well, I wrote a book because I was locked down by the pandemic. And then my daughter came to see me and said, Daddy, this is going to be a disaster because the previous generation was very brilliant. It came the crisis of Lehman Brothers, and then they have lost the decade with all these crises because in Europe was very strong, the crisis of Lehman Brothers goes. And now it's this pandemic, it's going to block us, we are going to be absolutely destroyed in our possibilities. So I thought, well, I have to write a book for the new generation. And the book was published in Europe under the name of Momentum, because I think we have now the momentum for our development. But then when I came to India, they said to me, well, Momentum is not going to be very attractive. So the editor decided to change the name and created the name of The Great Reset, Alt Control Humanity. And it's a world that tries to illustrate the new generation of the changes in all the areas through artificial intelligence. But at the same time, the book has a great debate in the United Nations on the movement from the United Nations to the United Humanity. Because this is going to be the key thing, you know. The great change that we are now confronting is that the nature has already shown to you that each individual is absolutely essential. And there is a proof that is very evident. Everybody has a different fingerprint. So nature has managed to develop 8 billion different combinations in just 1 centimeter of skin. So when you think what is the combination of the neurons, you will understand that it's going to be much more powerful. So each individual is key. And we go from an era of masses to an era which each individual is a source of intelligent energy. That is the key thing, you know? And the book tries to open the mind to the new generation on how everything is going to change, even in the understanding of nature. For example, I think that we are going to discover for the first time the language of the birds. You know, the birds maybe are like the humanity. We have not one language. Maybe we have 4,000 languages in the world. The birds, maybe each species has a different language. And we have not the mechanism of human beings to discover that. But I think through artificial intelligence, we're going to discover what the birds are talking from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock every morning. 2 full hours speaking all the time. And then we're going to discover that we are among much more intelligent beings than what we think. And the same will happen with mobility, with education, that we are moving from a world of illiterates, because 90% of the population of the world was illiterate in 1900. And now we have maybe only 20% who is illiterate. So big changes, and it tries to show to all the people how the world is going to change. But there is one thing that is key, that without a solid global architecture, everything is very fragile. Everything can be destroyed. And the last times we have been put the idea that environment is key, but environment, even by being very naughty people, will not be a big problem maybe until 30 years. Everybody is forgetting that health is the key. Because when we had the pandemic, thanks God, it was a relative pandemic. But the day that we have a pandemic that has a virus that attacks immediately our optical nerve and the population becomes blind in 24 hours, the humanity will discover how fragile we are. And we will have no means to stop that. And we have the whole planet that could become blind in 24 hours. So I think that the top priority is to show that health is key. And above this priority is peace, because bombs can destroy everything in 24 hours. So the book is trying to illustrate the young population that is not only a question of being good professionals, it's a question also to be a generation for peace. And with this I will finish. I will say that one of the key things in this world, in my view, is that in the past, people were more fond of wars. You know, there is this very famous book of Marcel Proust. In French, it's called À la recherche du temps perdu. In translation in English is In Search of Lost Time. That explains how in 1914, in the eve of the First World War, the German young people and the French young people were rushing towards the recruitment offices to go to the front. There had been no war between France and Germany since 1871, the last one. So in 1914, there had been already 43 years without war. And at that time, the life expectancy was 40 years. So nobody had lived the war except certain exception of people. So everybody wanted to go that for a kind of experience. Nowadays, it's the contrary. The people who are declaring wars, the first thing they say is that there will be no casualties. Why? Because the societies, they don't want the war. So we have to say to the young generation that they cannot be driven towards any war because they have the best expectancies in the future if they continue to build the world of possibilities. Thank you.
Right. Let me also bring you back to diplomacy and just ask you a few questions related to that. Are you looking at this era of Donald Trump as an era in which, you know, the differences or the dissonance between US and EU has grown? Because, of course, there's an issue of tariffs, which, you know, US had had issues with various countries. Now is the issue of war. How do you see this?
Well, I think that, you know, this second period of Donald Trump has been for only 1 year. So we have to see how things evolve. In my opinion, you know, the United States is the country in the world that should be more interested to have a kind of global order, because it's the country with the largest number of multinational companies, of companies operating in all the world. So this kind of very nationalistic approach, I think it's not convenient, obviously, for the world, but it's not convenient for the United States. But obviously, things take time, you know. The timing of the things is very important. I always put an example with the case of a city and a major. You have a city that is very well balanced in the budget, and suddenly comes a major that says, oh, we have to improve the cleaning services, the transport services, etc. And some banker comes and says, you know, I can lend you money because your finances are so good that we can lend you money. So he says, okay, I take 10% of my budget in extra money. So this person immediately improves the services of cleaning, of building new roads. It's fantastic. But then the next majors, they have the same money than before, less 10%. So they have begun to reduce all these services. And the people say, you know, people were criticizing that major that was taking a lot of extra money, but at least cleaning, new roads, new education was created. And nowadays, these people who are criticizing are reducing all these capabilities. It's very difficult to explain to the population who was doing well and who was doing right. So everything takes time. I think that the American society is so vibrant with so many actors that in the long run, the vision of the multilateral system, of the open world, will be the winner one.
Right, but does Trump have a point when he says that NATO members have been taking the United States for granted, they've not done their bit? Do you agree with President Trump when he makes such comments about NATO?
Sorry?
President Trump has repeatedly said that NATO members have not done their bit when it comes to NATO, not contributed their part, and that they have taken the United States for granted, which has largely been funding NATO. Do you think he has a point there? Is that a fair point for him to make?
Well, it depends. It depends. If you want to go to a world of confrontation, I think this vision of increasing the budget of defense can be right. But I don't think that weapons and confrontation is any solution for humanity. I don't think so. You know, I think that we are progressing so much in all the fields. You know, more or less medicine is multiplying all the discoveries every 2 years. We are growing at great speed, and I don't think that weapons is going to be any solution. Why? Because weapons, you have two paths. Either you invest in weapons to discourage someone who can attack you, but just to discourage. So to a certain extent is throwing the money to the dustbin because you are not going to use it. Or the other path that is even worse is that you are investing because you will use it. So in that case, the destruction will be larger. So I think that we are in a world where the potential of the intelligence, the potential of the creativity is so large that we have to say to the people who are interested in weapons that is not the way we want to go for the future. That is very important, you know, because the only industry that has suffered no setback in the last 100 years is the industry of weapons. And I'm very surprised when people say, you know, in any country say, well, I will build 5 new submarines, 5 new nuclear submarines that will cost $5 billion. And the people accept that. But at the same time, they say, oh, we cannot increase our budget for health in 200 million because we have no money. How you can have 5 billion for the arms and not having 200 for the health? So I think people have to be more wise and say, you know, I have a life that I'm in a moment of history that I have all the possibilities. I can talk to someone who is in the desert of Wadi Rum or who is in the forest in Brazil, and I can see the person and have the voice, the image immediately. I can take a flight and go to Australia or to Paris in only 7 hours. I can have my cataracts operation done in only half an hour. I have full of possibilities. Why I have to be a kind of macho thing of testosterone, of I'm going to show that I am stronger than the other? You know, I think we have to evolve to this new world where what I'm interested is that someone invents the vaccine against malaria or against dengue. For me, it's not important if the one who will invent that is Indian, Australian, Chinese, or Norwegian. I want the capacity of a human being. And I think, and with this I will end, we miss a big opportunity with this pandemic. Because this pandemic is showed that we had something in common in all planet Earth, that we were human beings. So it was the same if you were Japanese, if you were Australian, Danish, American, or Mexican. If you had the virus going into you, you suffered the COVID. But at the same time, it didn't happen to the dog, it didn't happen to the hen, it didn't happen to other animals. It happened to the human beings. So that was a great alert given by the nature to us, saying, stop being confronted amongst of yourself. Try to understand that you are a single species in this planet, and you have to build the new world, that is the world of the united humanity.
Right. Ambassador Pujol, thank you so much for your views on diplomacy and beyond diplomacy as well today. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ambassador. May we now request Ashish Sehgal, CEO, Times Television Network and Chief Growth Officer, Times Media and Entertainment, to present Sir with our token of appreciation.
Big round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for joining us.